Hello. Well, as you are settling in and everybody's adjusting their screens accordingly, I'll take a few minutes to say hello and introduce our panelists for today. First of all, welcome everyone to the Livre Canada Books webinar on accessible digital books and export. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. My name is Gabrielle Echeverry. I'm the communications manager for Livre Canada Books. And I'm here today just to help with the hosting the webinar and answering any questions that might come up that aren't related necessarily to the content of the webinar, but any trouble that you might have with any technical issues or so forth during the webinar. So yes, thank you and welcome again. So the webinar will take about 60 minutes. The presentation will take about 60 minutes, and we'll reserve some time at the end for your questions. And so we're really looking forward to any questions that you might have and your feedback throughout the webinar. So please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the Q&A section. For me, it's at the bottom of my screen, but for some of you, it might be on the right-hand side. And if you have any questions that you want to direct to me personally as the host in terms of your having problems hearing, of course, I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well right now. Please feel free to contact me via the chat function. Of course, I will be here even if I turn off my microphone after this brief introduction. You can always contact me afterwards. So without further ado, I think we'll get into the content for today. As many of you know already from our invitation and the information that we have on our website, the European Accessibility Act establishes accessibility requirements across all EU member countries for numerous products and services, including ebooks and ebook reading systems. With Canada as the guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2021, Canadian publishers are poised to deepen their presence in book markets throughout the European Union. And we hope we'll benefit from learning about these accessibility requirements and their implications for the industry ahead of the EAA implementation in 2025. We're eager to learn about accessible publishing legislation initiatives in the significant export market today, and I'm delighted to introduce our speakers, Cristina Musinini, Elisa Molinari, and Gregorio Pellegrino from Fondazione LIA. And I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations in Italian. We're trying to get our languages all up to speed, but it's hard when we're dealing with so many people from around the world. We are working on it, but thank you. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Fondazione LIA, it's a nonprofit organization that promotes the culture of accessibility in the publishing field. Its goal is to allow print impaired readers to choose how, when, and above all, what to read, thus fostering social integration and active participation in the world of culture, school, and work. To achieve this objective, Fondazione LIA carries out research and development activities in the field of digital accessibility, organizes awareness-raising events, offers training courses and consulting activities, and is part of an international network of organizations dealing with accessibility of contents. Set up in 2014 by the Italian Publishers Association, since its foundation, it has also been able to count on the collaboration of the Italian Blind and Visually Impaired Union, and which became an institutional member in November 2017. In addition to being with us today to tell us about the European Accessibility Act and its impact on the publishing industry, Cristina, Elisa, and Gregorio have been working with us on a more detailed report on the same topic, which we hope will be published early in the new year, and it will be available in both English and French. So we're also really looking forward to that part of the project. So welcome to all three of you. Thank you very much for being with us. And I'll turn over the mic to you so that you can get started.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle, for this presentation, and thank you all. It's really a pleasure being here today, even if you are live from our living rooms in Varese, Milano, and Torino. We hope to have a further occasion to meet in person in possibly next year. My name is Elisa Molinari, and I'm a project manager at Fondazione LIA. And today with me are two colleagues who will help me in this presentation. What we'd like to do is to provide you with a comprehensive overview of the European Accessibility Act, understanding what it is, the timeline of implementation, which are the beneficiaries, which are the products and services which are covered by the Accessibility Act, the enforcement, the penalties and the exemptions. To do so, Cristina Musinelli will be your speaker. Cristina is the Secretary General at Fondazione LIA, and she has a deep knowledge of the publishing world as well as the accessibility one. She's the Secretary General of LIA, and she's the person who within LIA, in collaboration with the Italian Publisher Association and the Federation of European Publishers, has worked a lot with in regards to the theme of European Accessibility Act. So she's the best person to provide you with a description of it, and the best person to answer your questions, if any, at the end of the presentation. Moving on, we would like to provide you with a presentation of what we have learned in these years working side by side with publishers, Italian ones, small, medium, and large publishing groups, as well as international operators working in the publishing ecosystem. And we would like to share some tips and some strategies which we think could work also for Canadian publishers willing to embrace accessibility right now. Last but not least, I leave the floor to my colleague Gregorio Pellegrino, who is our Chief Accessibility Officer, who will provide an overview of the elements of the accessible digital publishing ecosystem. Gregorio is in charge of our research and development activities within Fondazione LIA and takes care of all the activities linked to the production and distribution of digital content. And I think it's worth mentioning that he's also the son of a publisher, so he knows the publishing world quite well. It's worth mentioning that we are all part of Fondazione LIA. As Gabriele said, we are an Italian not-for-profit organization. We are a kind of strange creature, as we were set up by the Italian Publisher Association with the collaboration of the Italian Blind Union in 2014. So for us, it's really important to create a deep connection between the publishing world and the organization working, which represent persons with disability. Members of LIA are also the Italian Dyslexic Association and the Library for the Blind, Regina Margherita of Monza, as well as 17 publishing houses. So we try from the institutional point of view to a most operational one in our daily activities to create bridges between those two communities in order to provide solutions which are accessible for everyone. Actually, we were set up in 2014, but actually we are a bit older, as LIA began its work in 2000 as a project of the Italian Publisher Association. And back then we had a very precise goal, which was to create an online catalog of accessible ebooks. So that's when we decided to work with Italian publishers of fiction and non-fiction and create an ecosystem where they could produce ebooks which were accessible since the very beginning. That was the goal of the project, and at the end of it, we created an online catalog which featured 3,000 accessible EPUBs. And in order not to avoid all the work that we had done till then, but to broaden the scope of our activities, the Italian Publisher Association created Fondazione LIA, the foundation, which carries out the activities. So we work to enlarge our catalog. Today, it features more than 26,000 ebooks of our Italian publisher. And we have been working with publishers also from the scholarly and educational sector, as our ultimate goal is to broaden the access to every kind of publication. So we work a lot with Italian publishers of every size, as well as international ones. And most of all, we work with every player of the digital publishing industry in order to collaborate and foster the creation of an accessible ecosystem, but we'll get to the details in a moment. As we said already a couple of times, we are Italian, but what is really important to us is our international network, as we feel that being part, a proactive part in this network, it's really crucial for everyone who is willing to embrace accessibility. We are part of the W3C, the EDR Lab, and the DAISY Consortium. And in this organization, we always try to bring the instances of Italian publishers, as well as bring back home what's discussed back then, because we really want to be alienated in terms of formats, standards worldwide. Now that you know ourselves a little better, we would like to ask you just a few questions so that we can learn something more about you. And I know that Gabrielle has been kind enough to prepare some questions for you, and I think she will send them through the pool in a moment. And thank you so much, Gabrielle, for your help. If you could answer these few questions, it could be really useful for us. Okay. That said, I'll leave the floor to Cristina Musinelli, who will be your guide towards the European Accessibility Act.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I have the, Elisa, you should share the screen. Okay. Just a moment. So first of all, what is the European Accessibility Act? The Accessibility Act is a European directive. And just for information, what means that is European directive? The directive in Europe is a European legislation that should then be implemented in all the national legislation of all the member states. When a directive is defined, there is some time in which the member state should implement in their legislation, and then after some time the directive become effective for all the member states. The European directive is a quite wide directive because the goal of the directive was to set up a range of minimal requirements for many different kinds of products and services. And the scope is to strengthen the right of people with disability and to offer them the possibility to have European accessible products. So also the small, medium enterprise should also have a market that is wider than what happens right now, where there are in any country different requirements, divergent specification, and so on. So the goal is to have an accessible European market as a final scope of the directive. The directive will set binding accessibility requirement, and but will leave the member state to define how to reach the goal. The timeline. The European Accessibility Act has been approved by the European Commission in June 2019. Should be implemented in the national legislation by 28 June 22, and then will be enforced in all European states by June 2025. That means that we have some time, but it's not a very long period. Say the legislation applies not only to European organization, but to all international organizations, including then European publisher, retailers, distributors, service provider, e-reading device producer, to comply with the requirement of the directive. If you want to sell your service and your product in Europe, you should comply with the directive. And this is why we are doing this seminar. Why the directive is relevant? Because one of the services that are included in the directive are e-books, and e-books are considered services. That means that not only the publisher, but all the organization involved in the publishing value chain, selling or distributing digital content, should be involved. And the directive also required that all the e-commerce website should comply with the accessibility requirement. So it's a very wide legislation. The beneficiaries are not only blind and visually impaired people, but all the people who have disability who can impede them to access to content. That means also dyslexic people or people who have problem accessing content, like old people. According the numbers of the World Health Organization, in Europe there are more than 2.5 million blind people, around 24 millions of low vision people, and this consider only the people who are certified, for example, as low vision. So they not consider people who have difficulty in reading because they are getting older and they are losing their sight. And also the number of dyslexic people is very, very high. It depends on the language. It could range between the 9 and the 12% of the overall population. And you should consider that also dyslexia has been only recently recognized as a disability. And so the number are also growing because as far as many students are recognized as dyslexic or with difficulties in learning, the number is growing a lot. As I say, there are many different products and services that are considered by the directive. What is of our interest are the ebook value chain, and also the reading solution and the reading apps. That means that either devices or online reading solution should be accessible. The requirement should be all these products and services should comply with defined standard requirement. The directive foresee also the possibility of a certification of conformity. For example, we as LIA Foundation certify the accessibility of the content of the publisher working with us, and there will be a European and national enforcement authority who will be the one who will verify that the legislation is appropriately implemented, and also the one to whom the people with disability who find the website or a content or a reading solution not accessible should ask for enforcement, and should also ask for penalties in case the producer or the publisher don't remediate the situation in a short period of time. This enforcement and this penalty, we will see later, will be defined at European, not at European level, but at national level. So it may happen that one country has different penalties or timeline for the remediation. When we spoke about ebooks, as I told before, ebooks is considered as a service. That means that all the value chain is included. So distributor and online retailer should be aware and should verify that the content sent them by the publisher is accessible. And in case it's not, they may also decide not to distribute it, because in case they distribute inaccessible content will be also under the issue of penalties and enforcement. The e-commerce website, not only the one used to sell books, but in general, e-commerce website should be accessible, and also online platform and mobile application. All the mobile solutions should be accessible as well. So if you have a website selling content also in the mobile version, also the mobile version should be created as accessible. I already explained the software and the reading solution. DRM also should not impede the accessibility. That means that, for example, the DRM should not allow the impede, for example, the availability of text-to-speech functionality or the copy and paste possibility. Right now, there are very few DRM that are fully accessible. Maybe Gregorio can provide you later more information. And the other thing that is really important is the end user should know exactly which are the characteristics of the content or the platform or the reading solution in terms of accessibility. That means that if you are a publisher, you need to provide a specific set of metadata describing which are the features of your ebooks. And this metadata should be distributed along the value chain and should be displayed to the end user, either in the website or on the e-commerce or in the reading solution. So the end user buy the content, and so they need to know exactly what they buy. Regarding devices, they are not, they have a different consideration because they are considered as product, and in this case they should comply with the requirement of the CE logo. So it's a different process. As I said before, there are market surveillance authority, and the penalty, could be defined by every single state. There are some exemptions. One is, some are related with the size of the organization, and some are related with the complexity of managing accessibility. The directive foresees exemption for micro-enterprise, and we will show later how this means, when the production or the distribution of accessible version can cause a disproportionate burden to the producer, or when a fundamental alteration of the content should be foreseen. In these cases, if you want to use this kind of exemption, it's not just that you use it and that's it, but you need to demonstrate in a very clear way that these are real problems, and you should provide detailed information to the market surveillance authority, and you need to document that. There are also some kind of books like comics, children books, and art books that are exempted, but not fully exempted, because the directives say that they should be considered in light of the applicable accessibility requirement. The directive have 3-4 years time to be fully implemented. Probably some kind of definition from technology side or from standard side may find new solution to make also this kind of book accessible. So if for the time of the implementation in 2025, this solution will be in place, also this kind of books should be created as accessible. Micro-enterprise have a very detailed definition, and micro-enterprise is an enterprise that employs fewer than 10 persons and which has an annual turnover not exceeding 2 million euro. Also, if you are exempted as micro-enterprise, the directive suggests that you, if possible, you should comply. And they also ask member states to help small, medium enterprise to comply, providing guidelines and tools to facilitate the application of the national measure transposing the directive. The disproportionate burden is very clearly stated in the directive, there is an annex describing all the kind of possible situation in which you may, the directive would impose a disproportionate burden. As I said, you must describe and justify the why you consider the accessibility a disproportionate burden, and the disproportionate burden in considered also in relationship with the advantage of the people with disability. It's important to say that disproportionate burden don't include lack of priority, lack of time, and lack of knowledge. So we strongly suggest that, for example, it's important that the publisher acquire the appropriate knowledge, because it will be quite difficult to explain that you didn't have time or you didn't consider accessibility your priority. And so our suggestion is start as soon as possible, because to be fully accessible, you need to start a journey. And so you need to start maybe with simple content and start acquiring knowledge and build up on what you have learned in the first phase. You have time to do this. What is the situation now? The European Commission is asking every member state to have one reference point for the implementation of the directive. So in each country, in Europe, there are organizations at governmental level who are starting to understand what the implementation may means. Also because the directive won't be probably a completely new law in each member state, but it may probably require some adaptation of existing legislation. So for example, in Italy, there was another directive, there was the web directive for public website, and the implementation in the Italian law was a change of an already existing law for website who was updated to comply with the new requirement. During the process of implementation from now until 25, the European Commission will monitor the implementation in the different member states to avoid the possibility to create again divergent legislation. So there is a national activity, but it would probably also be some kind of coordination. That doesn't mean that Europe can interfere in the process of the national legislation, but there is a table of consultation, let's say, at European level. What is an ebook? An ebook is a file based on electronic computer coding, and we know, so accessibility doesn't mean that you have to provide a specific format. So the directive don't oblige you to produce ebook in EPUB format or in EPUB format or in PDF format or in HTML format. But in any case, the kind of format you decide that should be accessible and should be also interoperable and possibly based on international standards. The manufacturer should design the product according to the directive and take in consideration the standard defined by the directive. They need to carry out conformity procedures and keep the information for at least 5 years, because in any time the commission or the national authority may check your requirement. And you should also provide a clear instruction describing the accessibility requirement. This means also there are also some requirements for importers. So if you sell your books in digital format through a European retailer, the European retailer may ask you if you are fully compliant with the accessibility requirement. In case you are not fully compliant, they may decide not to sell your product in the European market. And they may also say to the authority that the content that you are selling is not accessible. So this will be quite important. The same is for service provider. You need to ensure that there are procedures and that you are fulfilling all the requirements, and you also have to be aware about the accessibility of the other elements of the value chain. I leave the floor to Elisa, who will better explain the concept of born accessible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. So moving on in our presentation, we'd like to share now some insights that we have from the work that we have daily with publishers. So I don't know how many of you are already working with accessibility, how many are new to this concept. For those of you who are already working on it, you may already know that it's possible to fix almost everything that was not meant to be accessible as first, or at least almost everything. But at the same time, you will know now that it takes twice the time and so twice the cost. So even if it's possible to convert, for example, a publication which was not meant to be accessible first, or to make accessible a website or a platform which was not meant to be accessible, it's not the best solution. The best solution is to apply the born accessible principle, which is a sort of mantra within Fondazione LIA. What does it mean? It's easily understandable. It means that if you're about to think about designing and developing something new, a new product, a new service, in particular the ones covered by the Accessibility Act, the best way is to think it as accessible immediately. So accessibility doesn't have to be something which is add-on at the beginning of the process, but has to become something which is which is one of the key aspects of your service or product. We are showing right now a picture which we treasure a lot. This picture was taken in front of a shop a couple of years ago, and this taken, there were some works in front of the shop. So they put a signal saying, if you are on wheels, the access is on the other side of the shop. Is quite a kind sign saying, okay, if you are on a wheelchair, you have a stroller, or you are on your blades, you can access on the other part of the street. But this is not born accessible. What we like is to have a door which is wide enough for everyone to enter. So even it's a very kind sign, what we'd like to work on is, again, a door, a publication, a website which can be accessed to everyone in every possible way. Something that which we don't say loud enough very often is that an accessible publication and accessible website is a high quality product or service. Accessibility means quality, doesn't mean poor quality. I think that Gregorio will get into the details of that. It's because an accessible product or service is a very rich content which can be accessed by assistive technology as well as search engines. So what does it mean born accessible applied to your publishing houses and processing? It means, for example, to produce born accessible publications is to determine a specific procedure aimed at defining accessibility checks of a publication, adapting international standard metadata schemas, and provide accurate but friendly descriptions of accessibility features available for the publication. So work so that everyone is involved, can access your service and products. As LIA, we implemented this principle since the very beginning, before the phrase born accessible was invented, as we thought that it was really the best solution. So we taught publishers how to produce born accessible publication. We started with fiction and nonfiction, and in moving on, we addressed more complex layout publications. So which was the situation when we started? Maybe it's familiar to you as well. As for the traditional workflows, starting from a print book, we had 3 different processes in order for every user. For example, we had the process for Braille, print Braille, one process for enlarged characters books, one process for audiobooks. What we thought is that with digital publication, we could have just one high-quality process to have one single book, ebook publication, which was perfect for everyone. We are not saying that paper is bad and digital is always good. That's absolutely not our goal. We really treasure print publication. For example, when we organize training for users, we try to provide them with a presentation as wide as possible of the different possibilities. At the same time, we know that for a publisher with digital, it's possible to have within its own publishing house one process to have one book, one ebook, which is good for everyone. So which are the most common mistakes we witnessed in these very years? Well, the first one is that sometimes organizations think that the initial correction phase is the final goal. For example, I have a website and when I fix it, I'm done. Okay, that's not it. If you have a website, for example, and you want it to be accessible, you have, of course, to correct it in the first phase, but to maintain accessibility. It's important to think about the theme of accessibility as you think, for example, of antiviruses. So you install it once, and every 6 months you have to renew to check if it's working, because if you want to run it correctly. Another, as Christina mentioned before, another common mistake is to think accessibility as a one-shot activity. I press a button, I do something accessible, and I'm done. Okay, accessibility is a process. So if you're starting right now, you have to create your very own timeline and roadmap. Every organization has a unique one in accordance to its need, its organization, its flows. But you really have to state what you are about to do. You have 5 years, which are not a lot, but I think that it's a good time frame to start working in accessibility field. And another thing which is really important is to share what you are doing with end users. So to create, for example, a content point where users can reach out to you, ask questions, and continuously update it with the achievements you are getting at. Another mistake we usually witness is the fact that sometimes we see that organizations think that accessibility is just the responsibility of one team, of one person, instead of a shared value. The typical example that we do is about the alternative description of images, which is one of the most complex areas of accessibility, which is an added work to do. So sometimes the organization don't know who is, have long discussions about who should be in charge. So if everyone instead is at least aware of what is accessibility and what has to be done, we think that the results you'll get will be much better. So what's a good practice is to build a culture of accessibility. What does it mean in concrete? Is to start to have some training. The training, of course, will be very specific, will be, for example, about the production of digital publications, it will be about the creation of accessibility metadata, it will be about learning more about coding, how to create platforms and apps which are accessible. And at the same time, it means knowing more about the differences between accessible and inaccessible contents. We'll show you a short video in a moment trying to summarize what we mean with it. For example, as LIA, we invented this kind of event where we invite persons with disability reading an accessible book alongside authors and writers. So in order to show that if contents are accessible, everyone can do it in the most proficient way possible. So we really try to, again, build bridges between content producers and end users. Here we go with user testing again. Something that we witness and the international surveys tell us it's quite common is that organizations usually do not test their products and services with disabled end users. This is something which is crucial to us, and we feel to encourage this approach to everyone, because as you'll see, accessibility is not just about standard specification, which are fundamental. We are not saying that you can avoid them. Of course, they're crucial, but accessibility is also about user experience. So it's really important to start working side by side with accessibility experts who know how to access content with the assistive technologies. Okay, here it's Batman who is slapping Robin because he just uses automated accessibility testing. Well, as for LIA, I think Gregorio will get to that in a moment. For example, when we have to test ebooks, we run first many accessibility testing tools, which are, again, very important, but they are not enough. For example, these tools available can detect if an image has an alternative description, but they can say if that text is good or not in regards to that very precise image. Okay, so accessibility, it's like, for some ways, the game of the broken phone, the game of the phone. So if you have 10 children and the first one starts whispering a word which has to arrive to the last one, if it's enough that just one person doesn't play its part, and in the end, the work of our 9 people maybe will get lost. Accessibility is like that. So it's important that everyone play its part, because if they don't, the work done, for example, by publisher will be lost at the end. So this is something that it's also stated in the European Accessibility Act, which recognizes that everyone has a role to play. So recognizes that, for example, a publisher is responsible to produce a born accessible publication, check the accessibility and certify them and create metadata. A distributor or an aggregator has to ingest and distribute those metadata, implement non-blocking accessibility DRMs. Reading solution, for example, need to create a graphical user interface following accessibility metadata and display those metadata to users. So it's really a teamwork. So everyone is really called to play its part, to contribute to the cause. Again, collaboration is key, both within your very own organization, both at national and international level. There are many organizations working in this field. It's important to work with international standards, and it's important to create bridges also with organizations which represent persons with print impairment. So these are the key takeaways we would like to share based on the work we've done in consultancy and training in these years. So I think now it's time to get a little more practical, and I leave the floor to Gregorio for the most technical part.
Okay, so please, Elisa, stop sharing the screen so I can share mine. Okay, so thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Christina. As first item, I will show you a video we have prepared. And in this video, we will see Antonino, our colleague, who will follow the process of purchasing or borrowing an ebook, both in an accessible environment, which is the one with the white background, and in a non-accessible environment, which is the one with the blue background. So you can check the different environments. And we think that it is really important because with this video, we can put ourselves in the shoes of visually impaired users, and so try to understand from their point of view how it can be difficult to get access to the content. So let's share the video, and then we can move forward with the presentation.
Accessibility means freedom. Freedom to read everything you wish, whenever you want to. International standards and new technologies for digital reading allow the adoption of a new paradigm known as born accessible. Digital publications, websites, and apps can be designed to be accessible to people with visual impairments from their first publication. The recent European Directive, the European Accessibility Act, is also in line with this international framework and requires that the entire publishing supply chain becomes accessible. The goal is to offer everyone the same opportunities to read and get informed, without distinction. How can we achieve this result? The whole digital publishing ecosystem has to be accessible. In order to have an accessible ecosystem, it is necessary to involve all the players in the supply chain in every step, starting with the production of ebooks following the Born Accessible principle, through the creation and distribution to stores and online platforms of metadata describing the accessibility features of the contents. Thanks to the possibility of buying or borrowing ebooks on accessible websites, and by making reading accessible to all. Accessible websites and digital publications have to be designed to allow assistive technologies to correctly interpret their structure.
LIA Foundation. Heading Level 1. Image. Main menu.
If the contents are correctly tagged and organized, the speech synthesis can interpret them and guide users. For example, while browsing and searching an ebook catalog.
Divine Comedy. LIA. JPG. Hyperlink. ALL. Ebooks.
Furthermore, the colors and their contrast are fundamental elements for the accessibility of a website.
Fiction. Link. Classics. DBIG. JPG. Read the accessibility features of the book LIA label.
Users must be able to independently manage all the phases related to the purchase process.
The fields in red are required. The fields in red are required.
Is every digital publication accessible? To be accessible, contents must be semantically tagged in order for assistive technologies to interpret them correctly. When reading documents scanned as images, the speech synthesis does not intercept any information.
The page is empty.
Also, contents that are not correctly tagged do not offer a fully accessible reading experience.
Heading not found.
On the other hand, an accessible file can be read in all its parts, with all devices and assistive technologies. It allows you to go from the table of contents to the part you want to read with a click, and to navigate between the notes and the text to deepen the reading.
Table of contents. The Marrakesh Treaty. 1. Link. 1. Link.
Images are always described with alternative descriptions.
The image represents the 3 required steps to check the accessibility in even Apple file.
Today, with adequate knowledge, it is possible to include accessibility in every phase of the traditional processes of publishing and distributing of digital contents, thus enabling everyone to choose what they want to read. Reading improves your mood, health, and life. And you? Are you ready to play your part?
Great. So let's go deeper to try to understand what it means to, from a technical point of view, to have a fully accessible user experience. So here we have my slides. Okay, so let's start from the the point of view of publishers and content creators. As Elisa said, for publisher and content creators, it is really important to create born accessible publication, born accessible content. And this can be done using the most widely adopted output tools like Adobe InDesign or Microsoft Word and so on. We are in touch with Adobe InDesign because in Adobe InDesign you can make like the 80% of the work for creating accessible ebooks, and then you have to make some manual work after the export. But we are working with InDesign team to being able to make the whole accessible ebook within InDesign. And there are available on the web different guidelines that are for the different formats, so for EPUB and PDF, on how to make those publications accessible. So using the authoring tools and following the guidelines, you can have fully accessible publications. But then you need to validate the accessibility of your files to be sure that they are really fully accessible. And for this, you can use, for sure, automatic tools that are available both for EPUBs and for PDFs. But as Elisa and Batman said, that automatic tools are not enough. For this reason, we think that it is not mandatory, but is strongly recommended to have the file certified by a third party. In Italy, we as Fondazione LIA, we certify files, the ebooks for the publisher. Why is it important? Because it is difficult for publishers to have the experience inside the house to be sure that the files are perfectly accessible. And in this way, you can make a quality assurance using an external consultant, an external entity. And finally, but this is really, really important, is you should actually, for the European Accessibility Act, you have to produce the metadata about the accessibility of the content itself. You can use two formats. We will go deeper with metadata in 2 slides. And you will use those metadata for the supply chain, so for distributing those metadata along the supply chain, and to put them within the file, so they will go both within the file and to bookstores, aggregators, and so on. Okay. But what is an accessible ebook? Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an end user with disabilities. So let's think about blindness, low vision, color blindness, dyslexia. The idea is that the user should be able to read the content and to get it, to interact with it without the need of external help. So the user should be able to do everything within the content, highlighting the content, reading the footnotes, moving through the doc without any external help. And so creating fully accessible publications means to create a semantically rich publication. In this way, with the semantics, the reading solution can pass the semantic to the assistive technology, which are the technologies used by the visually impaired users. And with those information, the assistive technology can give to the end user the right content. And what it means to have a semantically rich ebook. It means to have a fully navigable table of contents, to have headings through the text, so the user can move from one heading to the other, to have correctly tagged lists, both ordered and unordered list, footnotes, tables with headings and all the semantics that are present in publications. So that usually are rendered as graphics in the publication. We have to translate those graphical information to semantic information for the end users. And another step that is really, really important, as Elisa said, are all the non-textual elements. For example, images, photographs, charts, infographics, and so on. For those elements, you have to provide both short description or a long description, depending on the complexity of images. So, for example, for simple photographs, a short description is enough. Maybe for a chart or for an infographic or for a graph, then and so on to explain the end user is inside that non-textual content, so that picture. Then we move to the metadata. As I said before, metadata is really, really important for the end user to understand before the purchasing or the downloading of the file, if the file is compatible with their needs and their technologies. So we have two different formats for metadata. One is Onyx. As you know, Onyx is used along the supply chain. So for aggregators, online bookstores, libraries, and so on. Okay. Sorry. And then we have another format, which is schema.org, which means which is a standard for embedding metadata in the file. And for both those formats, we have different ways to describe the different features of accessibility. So for digital distributors and aggregators, as Christina said, it is important to check the accessibility of the files they receive and to distribute the metadata correctly. And one important thing is the DRM. As Elisa said, DRMs can block the accessibility features because they usually inhibit the accessibility, the features for copying the file, and with inhibiting those features, they also inhibit the accessibility features. So we suggest to test different DRMs to check if they're compatible with, if they are compatible with DRMs, and to be sure that they are fully accessible. Sorry, I think I have an audio behind the scenes that are. Okay, sorry. Okay, so to be sure that the DRM is fully accessible, and for this we suggest to check out the Iridium LCP, which is a great DRM and which enable accessibility with it. And from a digital bookstore point of view, what it means for a digital bookstore, online bookstore to be accessible. It means to have a user interface which is fully accessible. This is because the online bookshops are the interface between the end user and the publication itself. So all the parts within the website have to be accessible, including credit cards, payment forms, login, confirmation emails, and so on. There are different guidelines that you can follow to ensure that you are compliant. There are the ones developed by the W3C for the web content accessibility guidelines. Furthermore, online bookstores will be obliged to show accessibility metadata to end user, so that the user can choose the right product for his or her needs before the purchasing. So the online bookstores have to display the metadata that the content producers created. And another important thing is that for creating fully accessible web platform, you have to take in consideration the little details, because with our consultations we have experienced that the devil is in the details. For example, it can be only a button without a description that blocks all the process of purchasing or getting the password or logging in and so on. And this is why we recommend to rely on experts and to check with the end user, as Elisa said, to check the user experience with disabled users. Okay, I'm moving to the end. One important thing is that we are sure that in future search engines will show accessibility information of the different resources in the search results. So we recommend you to pass this information to the search engine crawlers right now, and you can do it using the metadata schemas that are available. In this way, when search engine will display metadata information to the end user, you will be ready, and you will get a search engine optimization doing that. Okay, and then we are getting to the end with the reading solution. For sure, this is a real strong actor of the value chain, because in this environment, the user spends most of their time reading and getting the content. This is why it is important that not only the reading itself is accessible, but the whole user interface has to be fully accessible, which means also controls, buttons, the library view and so on, but also the different features like highlighting and the bookmarking functions. In our consultancies, we have found that those features, the highlighting and the bookmarking, are the most difficult to implement in an accessible way. So please check it out if your reading solution is accessible with these features. Those solutions are complex applications, we know that, but we also know that you don't have only to follow the international guidelines to be sure that your software works. You should also follow the user requirements. We have found different user requirements we have collected it during the years, which are not binding, but for sure those requirements can help many people in their daily use. Okay, so as last slide, you see a resume of the accessible publishing ecosystem. In the center, we have the end user. We always have the end user in mind. And for the end user, we have to be sure that every step, every actor of the supply chain of the publishing ecosystem keeps in mind the accessibility. Thank you. I think we can move forward, to the Q&A session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gregorio and Cristina and Elisa. That was really informative. A lot to take in. I'm still processing a lot of the information, even though I've been working with you guys on this project for a while. So it's good. It's a lot to think about. I'd like to open the floor now to anyone who'd like to ask any questions. While I give you the chance to get your questions together, I'll share the results of the poll that we launched very early on. I think you might find it interesting to see how evenly matched the people who participate in the poll are in terms of their their accessibility. So it's about 50-50 those who do produce ebooks. It's a little bit, it's not quite that close, but fairly close, that are already producing accessible ebooks. And also in terms of the exporters. So we already have some of the participants here today are already exporting, selling books in Europe, ebooks specifically here, and about 48% again are not. So this is good. I think it really displays the kind of range of publishers that we tend to work with here at Leaflet Canada Books. We have a lot of really experienced exporters and a lot of emerging exporters. At the same time, we have people who are very really well versed in digital publishing and potential accessibility. And so I think this is sort of pretty reflective of what we've seen over the years at Leaflet Canada Books. And as you'll see, we have a nice range of publishers here who are working in trade, scholarly, academic, educational, children's books, and 30% of other, which is interesting to find out what that other would be. But yes, so we have a good range here of folks. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please feel free to go to do so through the Q&A function. I don't see any open questions at the moment, and so maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing the poll results. I hope that was illuminating for you, for our friends in Italy, to see what what the range and the spectrum of publishers. And I guess maybe that's the first question I'll bring to you. I don't know who would be the best of the three of you to answer this, but given that range of publishers, so we have people who are already quite experienced exporters, experienced in digital publishing, and then others who are just emerging and starting out. What do you think would be the key element for them to take away from this presentation in terms of the act itself? So what are the things that they have to keep in mind, but also then in terms of the born accessible and then the sort of the nitty gritty of the how-to of producing accessible books? It's a big question, sorry.
Christina, you are muted.
I think that the most important thing is start from the beginning. So if you start while you are producing the content, to add accessibility is not a big burden. If you learn how to do, we have been working with 76 imprint in Italy. We have Mondadori, that is a very big one, but we also have very, very small ones. We have one that is specialized in Nordic titles, so they only publish translated books of Nordic authors. And we have one that is very small and very focused because they publish only sailing books. So they are specialized in books for sailing. So what is important is start since the beginning once and take it. And the key that we convinced publisher to move on accessibility was the quality. We convinced them that accessibility means accessible content is higher quality content. If you produce an accessible title, it's better for all the readers. So when we started, it was quite a long time ago, because we started, as Elisa said, in 2011. And at that time, a lot of people produced ebooks with horrible fonts, without taking consideration the table of content, with no links from a note and the text and so on. If you take care of accessibility, you do a better job for all your readers. And you also have to consider, we have done at the beginning of our project a survey asking blind, visually impaired people how they read, how many titles they read, which are the technologies they use, and so on. And they are avid readers. So they read as average 9-10 books a year. That is more than the average population in Italy. So you have a very loyal customer. And right now you don't serve them because they get books from a specialist organization who provide them for free, and who provide them maybe not timely and not all the titles that you publish. And so it could be something that is relevant for the legislation, that is relevant because of social need, but it could be also a business and marketing opportunity. For example, we have been working with a platform, with a publisher who has a platform who provide textbook for academic and scholarly books. And with the COVID, all the students went online. And so we were just in the period in which we worked with them to create to make their delivery platform accessible. And they were able to provide new content also to libraries, because they were able to serve also these disabled students. So don't consider accessibility only a burden, consider it an opportunity.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Your answer, and I think your presentation in general also really highlight the importance of the end user, right? And I think that sometimes gets lost in sort of larger discussions about legislation, which of course is really important, is trying to include those end users in a more fulsome way in sort of the field of literature. But I did really like the way that you kind of highlight the end user and how that end user in the end is also a purchaser of books, right? And is also a lover and reader of books. And that's something that we have to keep in mind as we go along. I don't see any questions yet. I think maybe everyone's being very shy, but so I have a couple of more, if you don't mind. We have, I think, 15 more minutes before we will say adieu. The other question I think that came to mind is something that I hear often in other presentations about accessibility, and you mentioned it, you discussed it very well here, is in terms of the workflows. And so how being born accessible helps with those workflows. And given your experience, it sounds like you have, again, a wide range of experience with very diverse publishing houses. What have you found has been sort of the main barrier to embracing born accessible workflows? Have you found something that's sort of key? I think, Gregorio, you mentioned something in your talk.
Yeah, we have worked with publishers that use different workflows, both XML first workflows, or workflows based on Word documents, or workflows based on InDesign. And for sure, what we have seen is that when the people that work in publishing house understand what accessibility means, and they understand that working for accessibility means working with those softwares in a better way, and sometimes in a quicker way, they start to create fully accessible publications without any major cost. The only real major time that you need for creating accessible ebooks is for describing images, because for all the other things that you have to do for publishing an accessible books, it can be done during the normal workflow, and the normal workflow can benefit from that because it gets quicker. For example, we do a lot of training on InDesign, and we have a training course that is called InDesign Ninja for understanding how to use InDesign in all its potential. And we have seen that sometimes we get people working on accessibility because they want to improve in InDesign, because using InDesign for accessibility means using InDesign with all the different features and some hidden features that you may don't know, both with Word, with Microsoft Word, and for XML workflows, it depends on they are created, but sometimes it is simpler to get an XML workflow accessible because the content is already well structured from that. So the only work you have to done plus the normal work is the image description from my point of view.
Okay,
If I
great,
just
thank
may
you.
add something, usually when we work with big publishing houses which have complex workflows and have people working, well, the first feedback is usually bad because they say, I don't want to have to add something new, I don't want to develop a new format or something, but accessibility is just about simplifying and working about the quality. So what we suggest is to have an audit of your workflows, so which is really useful to understand who has to be in charge of something, where accessibility can be added, and which are, for example, the training gaps to work on. So this is something which is usually very useful. So we start with that and then try to work on an accessible workflow. But as what you said is about simplifying and using the same tools, the same formats, and it just in a different way. So even in terms of timing, it's not about adding more time. Well, of course, as he said, image description requires a lot of time, especially for complex layouts or, for example, for textbooks. But as for the other operations, tagging and creating metadata, it's just it becomes quickly a routine activity. So it's something which can easily be adopted by everyone, from large publishers to very small publishing houses.
And the other thing that we do when we do training is not to explain the technical issue, but try to explain why they should do this kind of thing. That is completely different mindset. We have seen a lot of people who are really willing to understand. So it's not just and I think this is another problem with accessibility. Like accessibility has always been, especially in the web area, has always been presented as a, you have to stick to requirement, to specification, and so on. And it's a very technical presentation of accessibility. And this is another thing that I think is pushing people away from doing that. There is, I think, a question.
Yes, there is. So I can read it out to you if you'd like. So Italy is obviously leading the charge on accessible books. I'm curious to know if other key reading nations, Germany, France, UK, etc., are also working as quickly and effectively on this accessibility. And is Canada far down the line? I don't know if you were able to tell that from the research materials that you've come across about Canada.
I think that Canada is not so far behind, also because you have a government who is putting a lot of money on that. That is not the case of many other different countries. For sure, in Europe, the situation is moving because the Accessibility Act, when we started, we were kind of evangelists or crazy people. We decided to do this kind of thing because I was the member of IDPF board, and when I started thinking that it was possible to have the same file for accessibility and for publisher, the people was looking at me that I was crazy. And the concept of Born Accessible came out from our mind, and we started working with other organizations. So it was a kind of strange, I don't know what's the English for, but stellar
Alienation of planets.
alienation of planet, yes.
Yes, the planets aligned.
Yes, but in France there are some good examples. For example, Hachette has done a lot of work, but it was done because there was another crazy people like me who was really keen to make the publication accessible. So right now it was more the kind of pioneer people who have done this. With Accessibility Act, with the evolution of the technology, now it's more common to have people in publishing thinking of make accessible. I know that in Germany there is an organization who, sorry, an organization, there is a publisher association who decided to translate our paper in German because they are starting a working collaboration with the blind organization in Germany. So in Europe, because of the Accessibility Act, there are a lot of movement. So there are some organizations who are doing very well, and as in any case, there are early adopters and laggards. So I think it will be very interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years.
Okay, wonderful. I don't think we have any more questions in the QA, so I thank Catherine very much for sharing that question with us. It's always great to hear from you. And I think we'll leave it there for today. Were there any last points of interest that any of you wanted to make, Gregorio, Cristina, or Elisa?
No, just I want to say, if the question raised after, that it's sometimes the case. We have had a very nice experience in Italy, because it came an US expert was used to make speeches in US conference, where at the end there is a queue of people asking questions, and he asked a question for the Italian people and no one made it, and then he came back home and wrote an article say Italian don't make questions. So if you have questions later, you can send to Gabrielle, and maybe we can try to find the solution to send more information later.
Yes, if I don't know if Elisa or Gregorio, if you can share your screen, I think there's contact information there for anybody who'd want to. There you go. And so, yes, you can always reach out to them. And as Christina said, you can reach out to me. We will, of course, let everybody know once we're closer to publishing the results of the study that Fondazione LIA has been working on up until now. And as soon as we get those in English and French, which we're very excited to be able to do in both official languages, we'll let everybody know through our newsletter and social media channels. And of course, we'll let you know once the webinar, the recording of this event is available on our website for anybody who wants to view it again and perhaps share the video with somebody else. Christina, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just a last comment. Don't be afraid and don't be scared. It's a journey. You need to start. And if you don't start, you will never go anywhere. So you need to start and go by step. Don't think that you have to solve everything in the first try. You have to you start making, maybe starting from the simple books and so on. So, but start, because otherwise we will never achieve any result. So.
No, that's good advice in most aspects of life. So thank you. I think those are very good words to live by. So thank you again to all of you who took time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thank you to our panelists for your time and for sharing your expertise. And I have to, of course, thank the Government of Canada for their generous support for this event and a lot of the activities that we do at Legal Canada Books. So yes, the thank yous have been made, and we and have been made sincerely so. In addition, we have at the end of the webinar, you'll be led to a link for a survey to see how you liked the webinar, if the information was useful to you. We ask that you please fill out that information. It's really good for us to get your feedback and learn what works more for you, what doesn't, and we can, as we're working on the report, incorporate some of those, potentially incorporate some of those comments. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.